Myself on there. All right. Good morning, everybody. It's Dr. Jeff Evenson. I'm a board certified doctor of holistic health. I am not a medical doctor. I don't pretend to be. I don't practice medicine. I save that for the medical system. I practice holistic health care. I practice working on getting people actually healthy again through natural means without drugs or surgery. And some people think, does that really work? Well, I've been making a living at it now for over 17 years, working on getting people healthy, hundreds of people. And it's my calling, it's my passion. That's where I'm at with all of that. So if you're just joining the show, make sure you say hi in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Got a good show lined up for you today. We're going to talk about the thyroid. So this week was had a common thread. I had 3 new clients this week. All of them with a priority of thyroid issues, but the stressors were different on a couple. And what's interesting is all of their ranges, they were told by the medical system and through their labs that their TSH numbers and everything were normal. Everything was in range. Nothing to worry about. Yet these people, these women understood that there was definitely something wrong based on how they felt, and they've been feeling that way for years. So we're going to talk about that. It made me think of going back in history to Dr. Harrower, who this was back when they knew how to handle thyroid functions and all that before we had a lot of labs. So I appreciate you tuning in and watching. Get set on my end here. So, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best to try to answer them. Put those in the comments too. Let's see where people are watching from. Both watching from Facebook on my personal profile. Welcome. If you don't already, hit follow on my personal profile. But let's get at it. So good morning. Welcome to Morning Coffee with Doc Jeff. Grab your cup, get comfortable. I have a lot of material because this morning we're going to go deep, and I mean that. This is not a surface level conversation. This is the kind of conversation that I think a lot of people have needed for a long time and haven't been able to find. So I'm hoping to answer that. Good morning, Christine, woman dear to my heart. I'm in love with her. We're talking about the thyroid this morning, but not in the way you've heard it talked about before. Not labs, not medication, not is your TSH in range. We're going to talk about what the thyroid actually is, what it actually does, what actually stresses it, and why the way modern medicine approaches it is failing millions of people every single day. And I want to start, before we get into any of that, by holding up something. This is a book right here, okay? This is the Endocrine Handbook by Dr. Henry R. Harrower. It was published in 1939, 87 years ago, okay? And I want you to look at this for a second because what's in this book, the clinical understanding, the observational framework, the mapping of how the glandular systems of the human body relate to each other and depend on each other is more sophisticated in many ways than what gets practiced in most exam rooms today. Okay? That's not a knock on individual doctors. Most of them are doing exactly what they were trained to do. That's the problem. What they were trained to do got narrower and narrower over the course of the 20th century until we ended up where we are today, where the thyroid gets reduced to a single number on a lab report. And if that number falls inside a reference range, which is really big, you're told you're fine. Well, the reference range is taken from people around the globe, and it's averaged out. It's like this. When the reality is your range, your functional range might be here. and you can be outside of that. Dr. Harrower didn't practice that way. He couldn't. The tools didn't exist yet. What he had was his eyes, his hands, his clinical reasoning, and decades of careful observation. That's one of the reasons I study some of the historical, textbooks that are out there available, because these guys knew how to take care of the body way better than what we're seeing in the medical system today. Okay, so I study this stuff. And what he documented in this handbook is a thyroid system, not a thyroid gland in isolation, but a system, a set of relationships, a coordinated conversation happening between the thyroid and the pituitary, the adrenals, the gonads, and the pancreas, the digestive organs, the entire endocrine network operating together as a whole. He understood something that gets lost almost entirely in modern thyroid care, that the thyroid doesn't fail in a vacuum. It fails in a context. And until you understand the context, you cannot understand what's happening to the thyroid. And so throughout this handbook, there are reference notes from Dr. Kaslow, a modern clinician who found this work relevant enough to annotate, to add to bring forward. Okay? And that's not an accident. That's a practitioner recognizing that the clinical wisdom in these pages still applies. That Harrower was seeing things in 1939 that we've been trained to overlook. I find that remarkable, and I find it telling. Because here's what happened between 1939 and now. Medicine got very good at things, at certain things. Acute care, surgery, emergency intervention. Genuinely extraordinary advances in those areas. I often tell my clients, if you get into an accident, God forbid, or you're out skiing and you break a leg or you break an arm or something, don't call me, because I don't practice emergency care like that. You can come and see me after you get your bone set by the medical system. They're very good at that. Get it set, get it casted up, then you can come see me, and we can find out what nutrients we should support your body with to help with the healing process. You're not going to get that kind of conversation in the medical system either. But somewhere along the way, the model for chronic disease management got captured by a different logic. The logic of the pharmaceutical industry. And that logic runs like this. Identify a marker, set a range, and medicate to the range. Call it treated. For the thyroid, that marker became TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. And I want to explain what TSH actually is, because most people have never had it explained to them clearly. And here's the kicker, and a lot of people don't know this. If you're joining the show, be sure to drop in the comments where you're watching from. I really appreciate it. So TSH is not a thyroid hormone. So you're wondering, what is it? What could it be? It's a pituitary hormone. It is the signal the pituitary gland sends to the thyroid when it wants the thyroid to produce more hormone. So when your doctor measures your TSH, they are not measuring what your thyroid is doing. They are measuring what your pituitary is asking your thyroid to do. And that's a fundamentally different thing. So think about it this way. Imagine you wanted to know how productive a worker was, and instead of watching the worker, you measured how many times their manager called them. That's TSH. It's one step removed from the actual action, and it misses an enormous amount of the picture. What it misses, how much T4 the thyroid is actually producing. How much of that T4 is converting to active T3? Good morning, Kelsey, from Tennessee. Okay, so how much of that T4 is converting to active T3? Because T4 is largely inactive until it converts. How much reverse T3 is being produced, which is a brake on the system, not an accelerator. So whether thyroid hormone is actually getting into the cells where it needs to work, whether autoimmune activity is attacking the gland itself, whether receptor sensitivity is compromised, whether the nutrients required for thyroid hormone production, which is iodine, selenium, zinc, tyrosine, are even available in sufficient quantity. None of that shows up in a TSH reading. None of it. And even if you run a more complete panel, which shows free T3, free T4, reverse T3, thyroid antibodies, you're still only looking at the thyroid itself. You're still not asking what is burdening it. You're still not asking what upstream stress is creating the downstream dysfunction. You are still, in Harrower's terms, looking at one gland instead of the system. Okay. This week I saw 3 new clients, 3 people coming in for the first time, sitting across from me, telling me their stories. And in all 3 cases, all 3, when I ran their quantum nutrition testing, the thyroid showed up as the primary stress priority. Okay? The system that was under the most significant load, demanding the most attention from the body. Now, that happened with 3 out of 3 new clients in 1 week. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not saying that's always the number. It's not. But it's not a coincidence either, because we live in an environment right now that is extraordinarily hard on the thyroid system. And most people have no idea. Here's what was driving the thyroid stress in these 3 cases. 2 of them had significant parasitic burden, organisms. And I'll get into the specifics in the next segment, that were creating direct interference with thyroid function, burdening the immune system, compromising the liver and digestive pathways, and generating a level of systemic stress that the thyroid was absorbing and couldn't recover from. The third had a toxic chemical load pattern, environmental stressors, the kind that come from pesticides and agricultural chemicals, that were blocking the autonomic nervous system and creating downstream dysregulation that landed on the thyroid. 3 different people, 3 different root causes, and 1 common finding. And here's the question I want you to sit with. Would any of these 3 people have been identified by a standard TSH panel? Almost certainly not. Would they have been told their thyroid was fine? Quite possibly. Would they have walked out of a conventional appointment with an antidepressant or a referral to a specialist who would also run labs and also find nothing actionable? Very likely. That is the gap we're talking about this morning. The gap between what the standard system can see and what is actually happening in the body. Harrower understood in 1939 that the body is a system of systems, that the thyroid is in relationship with everything around it, that when the thyroid is struggling, your first question shouldn't be, what's wrong with the thyroid? It should be, what is burdening the thyroid? What upstream stress is creating this downstream response? Because the thyroid, in most of the cases I see, is not the problem. The thyroid is the victim. It is the canary in the coal mine. It is a system that shows you clearly and consistently that something else is wrong. And when you treat the canary instead of the coal mine, the canary keeps suffering, and so does the person attached to it. That's what we've been doing for decades, medicating the signal while ignoring the source. So this morning we're going to do something different. We're going to look at what actually stresses the thyroid, specifically the two patterns I saw most clearly this week: parasitic burden and toxic chemical load. We're going to look at what happens downstream when the thyroid is under that kind of stress, the symptoms, the diagnoses, the conditions that seem unrelated but aren't. And we're going to talk about what it actually looks like to address this correctly, not by treating the thyroid, but by unloading what's buried underneath it. Because the body isn't broken, it's buried. And buried things can be unburied if you're willing to look in the right places with the right tools. So let's get into it. Take your coffee. We have more people tuning in. If you're tuning in, please be sure to drop in the comments where you're watching from. I appreciate it. It's fun to see where we're at across the country. So far, we have Indiana and Tennessee on. Okay. So what actually stresses the thyroid? All right. So we've established that the thyroid is a victim, that the TSH test is looking at the wrong thing, that Harrower understood 100 years ago what we've lately forgotten, largely forgotten, not lately, that the thyroid lives inside a system, not in isolation. Now let's talk about what's actually creating the stress. And I want to stay grounded in this week because I think that's what makes this real. I'm not talking theory. I'm talking about 3 people who sat across from me in the last 7 days, whose bodies told me a very clear story once I asked the right questions. 2 of them had parasitic burden as the primary driver, and 1 had toxic chemical load. Let's take those one at a time. Okay? So, parasites and the thyroid. I know some of you just thought, parasites? I don't have parasites. That's a third world problem. I hear that all the time, and I understand it because that's what we've been taught. Parasites are something you get from contaminated water in a developing country. You take a pill and you're done. It's not something a person living in rural Minnesota needs to think about, right? Well, that belief is wrong, I'm telling you, and it's costing people their health. Let me give you some context. The CDC estimates that millions of Americans are carrying parasitic infections at any given time. And that's based on what gets tested for, which is a very narrow slice of what actually exists. Most conventional stool tests look for a handful of organisms. They miss the majority of what can be present. And they don't test at all for many of the forms that show up most consistently in clinical practice. I've heard from other practitioners that their clients actually sent a stool sample in with an actual foot-long parasite that came out of them, and they put that in with the stool sample, and the test report came back as negative for parasites. Why is that? Well, they miss the majority of what can be present, and they don't test at all for many of the forms that show up most consistently in practice. As I said, what are we talking about when we say parasites in this context? Okay, we're talking about nematodes, which are roundworms, cestodes, which are tapeworms, trematodes, which are flukes, ropeworms, which is a form that's been debated in the literature but shows up consistently in clinical detox work. These are not exotic organisms. They are present in the food supply, in the soil, in water sources, in undercooked meat, in contact with animals. If you have a dog, a cat, any other animals, some people have birds, good sources of parasites. In environments most people move through every single day. And here's the critical piece. They don't announce themselves. You don't feel them move most of the time. I've had some clients say they can feel them move. You don't see obvious symptoms that point directly to them. What you feel is the downstream effect of what they're doing. And that downstream effect looks like fatigue, brain fog, digestive dysfunction, immune disruption, hormonal imbalance, and yes, thyroid stress. Why the thyroid specifically? Okay, there's a few reasons for that. First, parasites tend to concentrate in areas of the body that are metabolically rich and I'm going to call it immunologically active. Say that word 3 times fast. Immunologically active. The liver is a primary target. Okay, and the liver has an intimate relationship with thyroid hormone metabolism. Okay, T4 converts to active T3 largely in the liver. Doesn't happen in the thyroid. I've read in places where over 75% of the T3 comes from that conversion of T4 through the liver. When the liver is under parasitic burden, that conversion gets compromised. You can have adequate T4 production from the thyroid and still have functionally low T3 at the cellular level because the conversion pathway is disrupted. Standard labs won't catch this unless someone specifically runs free T3. And even then, they may not connect it to hepatic stress. Second, parasitic burden creates a sustained immune activation pattern. The immune system is constantly responding, constantly allocating resources toward managing the infectious load. That chronic immune activation generates inflammatory signaling throughout the body. And the thyroid is exquisitely sensitive to inflammatory stress. Hashimoto's thyroiditis, the most common thyroid condition in the country, is an autoimmune condition. The immune system is attacking the thyroid gland. And chronic parasite burden is one of the factors that can drive and sustain that kind of immune dysregulation. Third, and this is the one that doesn't get talked about enough, parasites produce waste. Yes, they're pooping inside of you. Metabolic byproducts, biotoxins, compounds that the body has to process and eliminate. When parasite load is significant, that toxic output creates a burden on detoxification pathways. Liver, kidneys, lymphatics, colon. When those pathways are congested, inflammatory compounds recirculate. They land on the most stressed systems in the body. And the thyroid, already dealing with the indirect effects of parasitic burden, takes another hit. So now let me bring this back to this week's cases. One of the clients I saw had a presentation that included significant fatigue, mood instability, skin involvement, digestive dysfunction, and a history of being told repeatedly that her labs were unremarkable. When I ran her quantum nutrition test, the thyroid came up as the primary priority. And the identified stressor was a combination of nematode, cestode, and trematode patterns. Her liver was also showing significant stress, her colon and her gallbladder pathway. See, that's not a thyroid problem. that's a body under parasitic burden, and the thyroid, as the most visibly stressed downstream system, is the most visibly stressed downstream system. You medicate the thyroid in that scenario and nothing meaningful changes because the source is still running. The second client with parasitic involvement had a different presentation. More neurological involvement, more inflammatory and immune stress, a history that included significant Lyme-related exposure. And again, thyroid as primary priority. Again, parasitic stress patterns as the identified driver. Different organism signatures, same fundamental dynamic. Two different people, two different clinical pictures. Same root cause category, same answer from the body when you ask the right question. That's what quantum nutrition testing does. It lets the body tell you where the stress is and what's creating it, not what a reference range says you should be experiencing. It says what is actually happening in your physiology right now. I'll show you before I get into the next thyroid case. Let's see here. This is a chart that Harrower created. And the thyroid's in the middle, and you can see all of the linkages to everything that it works on. The green boxes are the endocrine system, the adrenals, the gonads, the pituitary, hypothalamus. Okay. Pineal gland is in there. These are minor or smaller glands. Follicle, placenta, parathyroids, thymus, liver, pancreas, they're all linked. It's really quite fascinating to see how we put that chart together. Now, let's see how I can remove this. It won't let me take it off the screen. Isn't that funny? Oh, here we go. No? Funny. Oh, let me just go back up here. There we go. All right. Click the right button, Jeff. Christine, you're welcome. Hopefully people can always pause back, or if you want, shoot me a direct message or a comment in the below, and I direct message me with your email, and I can send it back or send it through the comment below if you want me to send a copy of that to people. All right, so let's look at the third case, the toxic chemical load. All right, the third client this week had a different driver entirely. Not a parasitic burden. It was toxic chemical load, specifically a pattern consistent with pesticide and agricultural chemicals exposure landing on the autonomic nervous system. Okay, let's talk about what that means, because this is a category of thyroid stress that almost nobody in conventional medicine is looking for. And it may be one of the most widespread drivers of thyroid dysfunction in modern populations. We live in an environment saturated with endocrine disrupting chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, glyphosate, industrial chemicals, plastics, heavy metals. These compounds are in the food supply, the water supply, the air, the soil. They are in the products people use every day. And a significant subset of them are specifically disruptive to thyroid function. And here's how that works. Many of these chemicals are structurally similar to thyroid hormones. They can bind to thyroid hormone receptors without activating them properly, blocking the signal. They can interfere with the enzymes responsible for thyroid hormone synthesis. They can disrupt the transport proteins that carry thyroid hormone through the bloodstream. They can impair iodine uptake. And the iodine is the raw material the thyroid uses to make hormone in the first place. Glyphosate specifically has been shown to chelate minerals, meaning it binds to them and makes them unavailable. And the minerals required for thyroid function, selenium and zinc, are among them. They get caught in that net. But the mechanism I want to focus on this morning, because it's the one that showed up in this client's case, is the autonomic nervous system connection. The autonomic nervous system is the master regulator of the body's automatic functions: heart rate, digestion, immune response, hormonal signaling, stress adaptation. The ANS governs all of it. It operates in two modes that you probably heard of: sympathetic, which is the fight or flight state, and parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest state. Health requires the ability to move fluidly between these two states depending on what the body needs in any given moment. When toxic chemical load disrupts the ANS, and it does consistently in people with significant pesticide or agricultural chemical exposure, the body loses that fluid regulation. It gets stuck. Usually stuck in a sympathetic dominant pattern. Nervous system is always on. They're always stuck in fight or flight. A lot of people might call that survival mode. The body's just trying to survive at that point. Trauma can put it in that place too. But being stuck in that sympathetic dominant pattern, it's a chronic low-grade fight or flight state that the body can't fully exit. And in that state, the thyroid gets suppressed deliberately, because the body in survival mode down-regulates reproduction and metabolism, which is what the thyroid governs, in order to redirect resources toward immediate stress response. So what that means is if you don't have a sex drive, if your libido is low, the body is shutting down systems that it doesn't require to survive. And I've seen that in case after case where people complain about low libido. There's something shunting that in the body. That's not a malfunction, okay? This is the body doing exactly what it's designed to do. The problem is that when the autonomic nervous system stays dysregulated, because the chemical burden that created this disruption is still present and still accumulating, the thyroid stays suppressed for months, for years. And the person feels everything that goes with that: fatigue, weight gain, brain fog, mood disruption, cold intolerance, and hormonal chaos. And they get a TSH test, and the TSH is in range because the pituitary is still asking the thyroid to work. It just can't hear the answer clearly anymore. Or the thyroid is working, but the output isn't converting, or it isn't getting into cells efficiently. And none of that shows up in the TSH number. So this client's presentation included chronic fatigue, pain patterns, neurological symptoms, bowel dysfunction, and a history of environmental exposure that had never been evaluated or addressed. When I ran the quantum nutrition testing, the ANS showed as blocked. The identified stressor was a toxic chemical load pattern. And sitting right underneath that ANS block, absorbing the dysregulation that pattern creates, was the thyroid. Same finding as the other two clients, different path to get there. So what harrower would have seen, Here's what I keep coming back to when I look at these three cases through the lens of this handbook that I showed you. I always pop it up here again. Harrower wasn't working with quantum nutrition testing. He didn't have cell core protocols or functional lab panels. What he had was a clinical framework that understood the body as an integrated system and a commitment to observing the patient in front of him rather than waiting for a number to tell him what to think. He mapped the thyroid in relationship to the pituitary above it. I suppose I could put this back up. The pituitary above it, let's see here, which would be right up there. The adrenals alongside it, the liver and digestive system below it, the nervous system threading through all of it. He understood that when the thyroid was struggling, you looked at the whole picture, not just the gland. That's exactly what quantum nutrition testing allows me to do in clinical practice today. Ask the body what's stressed. Ask what's creating the stress. Follow the relationships. Treat the system, not the symptom. The tools are different. The understanding is the same. And the gap between that understanding and what happens in most thyroid conversations today, that gap is why people are still suffering. That gap is why 3 new clients walked into my office this week with thyroid as their primary stress priority, and in all likelihood, none of them would have had that identified anywhere else. 87 years after Harrower published this handbook, we are still relearning what he already knew. So what's the bottom line from this segment? The thyroid doesn't fail randomly. It fails in context. And the 2 most significant contexts I see clinically, the 2 that showed up in 3 consecutive new clients this week, are parasitic burden and toxic chemical load. Both of them create thyroid stress through different mechanisms. Both of them are almost entirely invisible to standard lab testing. Both of them are identifiable when you ask the body the right questions. And both of them are addressable, not by treating the thyroid, but by removing what's burdening it. That's the work. That's what phase 1 is designed to do with me. In the next segment, we're going to talk about what happens downstream when the thyroid is under this kind of stress, because I guarantee that some of what you're experiencing right now, things you may have been told are separate conditions with separate causes, are part of the same pattern. Okay? This will be fun. All right, so the downstream effects that nobody connects. So we've talked about what stresses the thyroid: parasites, toxic chemical load, ANS dysregulation. There could be even an even longer list of things that could be on there, but this is what I saw this week. We've talked about why the standard test misses it. We've talked about Harrower and what he understood a century ago that we've largely forgotten. Now let's talk about you, okay? Because here's where this gets personal. The thyroid is not just some gland sitting in your throat doing one job. It is involved in virtually every major system in your body: energy production, metabolism, mood, hormones, digestion, skin, hair, brain function, cardiovascular regulation. It's one of the most influential systems in the entire body, which means when it's under stress, you feel it everywhere. And the tricky part, you usually don't feel it as a thyroid problem. You feel it as 10 other things. Things that get diagnosed separately, medicated separately, and treated as if they have nothing to do with each other. So let's go through them. And as I do, I want you to keep a mental tally. How many of these sound familiar? Fatigue. Let's start with the obvious one. You're not tired. Not, I need a nap tired. Not, I had a busy week tired. I'm sorry. You are, let me start over. Let's start with the obvious one. You're tired. Okay. You're not the, I need a nap kind of tired or I need a busy week kind of tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones. The kind where you wake up after 8 hours of sleep and feel like you didn't sleep at all. The kind where you hit 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it's all you can do to keep your eyes open. This is the number one complaint I hear. And it gets attributed to everything: stress, age, poor sleep, depression, being a parent, working too hard. Sometimes those things contribute, but underneath a lot of the chronic treatment-resistant fatigue is a thyroid system that is struggling to produce and deliver the energy signal that the body needs. The thyroid regulates your metabolic rate, the speed at which your cells produce energy. When that signal is compromised, everything slows down, not just physically, cognitively, emotionally. The whole system drops into a lower gear and can't find its way back up. Okay. Another one, brain fog and memory issues. And speaking of cognitive, let's talk about the fog. You walk into a room and forget why you went there. You're in the middle of a sentence and the word just disappears. You used to be sharp. You used to be quick. Now you feel like you're processing everything through a delay. This one gets attributed to aging more than almost anything else. Oh, that's just getting older. No, getting older does not mean your brain has to run at half speed. It could also mean you had an injury. Some people have brain injuries. Okay. Thyroid hormone is critical for neurological function. It supports the myelin, which is the insulation around nerve fibers that allows signals to travel quickly and clearly. It supports neurotransmitter production and regulation. When thyroid function is compromised, the brain feels it directly. And when you add parasitic biotoxins or chemical loads circulating through the system on top of that, the cognitive impact gets amplified significantly. I saw this in multiple cases this week: brain fog, word recall difficulty, mental sluggishness, all present, all connected to thyroid stress. None of it attributed correctly in previous care. Let's talk about your mood. Depression, irritability, anxiety. This is the one I think causes the most harm when it gets missed. Because when someone comes in with a persistent low mood, emotional flatness, irritability that doesn't match their circumstances, or anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, the standard response is a mental health referral and often a prescription. And sometimes that's appropriate. But a lot of the time, what's actually happening is physiological. The brain is not getting the regulatory support it needs because the thyroid system is under load. Thyroid hormone influences serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, the primary neurotransmitters involved in mood regulation. When thyroid function drops, those systems don't get the input they need. The result looks like depression. It looks like anxiety. It responds partially to medication because the medication is working on the neurotransmitter directly. But the underlying driver is still running, which is why so many people on antidepressants still don't feel right. I had a client this week on 2 antidepressants, still depressed, still fatigued, still not functioning the way she wants to. And when I ran her assessment, the liver came up as the primary priority, loaded with parasitic burden, which is exactly where her antidepressant medications get processed. And right alongside that, the thyroid system under stress. She's not treatment resistant. She's undertreated at the root level. There's a difference. All right, weight that won't move. This one, I hear this constantly, and I know how frustrating it is. You've cleaned up your diet, you're exercising, you're doing everything right by every measure you've been given, and the scale doesn't move. Or it moves a little and comes right back. And you get told to try harder, eat less, move more, as if willpower is the variable you're missing. The thyroid is the primary regulator of metabolic rate. If the signal is compromised, your metabolism slows. Full stop. You can eat perfectly and exercise consistently, and your body will still hold weight if the metabolic signal isn't working correctly. Because the body in a stressed thyroid state is in conversation mode. It is holding on to everything it can. I said conversation, I meant to say conservation. The body in a stressed thyroid state is in conservation mode. It is holding on to everything it can. That's not a character flaw. That's physiology. Okay? And it doesn't resolve by trying harder. It resolves when the thyroid system gets the support it needs, which means addressing what's burdening it upstream. Hormonal chaos. Ladies, this one's for you specifically, though it affects everyone. The thyroid and the sex hormones are in constant conversation. I meant to say that word this time. Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of them are influenced by thyroid function. And the liver, which is already compromised in many of the cases I see, is where sex hormones get cleared. When the liver is under stress and the thyroid is struggling, you get a hormonal picture that looks like a mess. Irregular cycles, heavy flow, PMS that's out of proportion, perimenopausal symptoms that seem to hit earlier and harder than they should, low libido that's been present for so long it starts to feel like just who you are. These are not random. They are downstream effects of a system under load. I'll give you a specific example from this week. One of my new clients, 7 months postpartum, still breastfeeding, came in the day after an ER visit for a gallbladder attack. Thyroid as primary stress priority. And when you look at her full picture, the fatigue that predated her pregnancy, the acne she's had since childhood, the lifelong heartburn, the mood instability postpartum, it's all one pattern. A thyroid system that's been under stress for years, now dealing with the additional demands of pregnancy, C-section recovery, and breastfeeding, finally loud enough to produce an acute event. The gallbladder attack got her into the ER, but the thyroid stress is what got her into my office, and that's where the real work begins. Skin and hair. Let's keep going down the list. Dry skin that no lotion fixes. Hair that's thinning or falling out more than it used to. Eyebrows that are disappearing at the outer edges. That one is a classic and underappreciated thyroid sign that hair wear actually documented. Brittle nails. Skin that lost its tone and texture. These are not vanity complaints. They are the body's surface level communication about what's happening internally. The skin and hair are highly responsive to thyroid hormone. They require adequate T3 to maintain healthy cell turnover and structure. When that signal weakens, the surface changes, and topical solutions don't fix internal problems. Okay? Digestion. The gut connection doesn't get talked about enough in thyroid conversations, but it should. Thyroid hormone regulates gut motility, the speed at which food moves through the digestive tract. When thyroid function slows, so does digestion. Sorry, I forgot to hit go live on Instagram. That's a stupid feature. All right. So when thyroid function slows, so does digestion, constipation, bloating, sluggish transit, food sitting longer than it should. And when food sits longer than it should, fermentation increases, bacterial balance shifts, and the gut environment becomes more hospitable to exactly the kinds of organisms that create additional stress. It's a loop. Thyroid stress slows the gut. A slow gut worsens the terrain. A worse terrain increases the burden on the thyroid. This is why drainage and gut support are always part of the early work in phase 1. You can't address the thyroid effectively if the elimination pathways aren't moving. Okay. Cardiovascular and fluid regulation. One more that tends to surprise people. The thyroid influences heart rate, cardiac output, and fluid balance throughout the body. When thyroid function is compromised, circulation efficiency drops. Fluid doesn't move the way it should. You get swelling in your hands, feet, or face. You get a heaviness that isn't quite explained by anything else. I had a client this week with facial swelling, fluid around the eyes, pressure that imaging could explain. CT was clear. MRI is clear. And yet the symptoms were very real and had been progressing for years. When I looked at her full picture, ANS was blocked, her lymphatics were congested, her thyroid under stress. It made complete sense. The fluid wasn't moving because the regulatory systems responsible for moving it weren't working. That's a thyroid adjacent conversation that conventional medicine never got to because the labs looked normal. So the common thread. Let's step back for a second. Fatigue, brain fog, depression, anxiety, weight resistance, hormonal imbalance, skin changes, hair loss, digestive function, fluid retention, swelling. How many of those have you experienced? How many of those have you been told are separate problems with separate causes? They're not. In a significant percentage of cases, they are one pattern. A thyroid system under stress, producing downstream effects across every system it touches. And the reason they get treated separately is because the standard model doesn't look for the connection. It looks at each symptom in isolation, assigns it a diagnosis, and reaches for a corresponding medication. And people stay sick because you can medicate every one of those symptoms individually and never touch the thing that's driving all of them. Herrera knew this. He mapped it. He documented it in a handbook that's been sitting on shelves for 87 years, annotated by clinicians who recognize the same truth in their own practice. The thyroid is not your problem. The thyroid is showing you where the problem is. And the next question, the one that actually matters, is what do you do about it? That's what we're going to cover next. All right, we're probably going to go a little bit long today, but you're going to want to hear this. It's all pertinent information. All right, I lost my spot. So here's where we get practical, because I know what happens when you listen to something like this. You start connecting the dots. You start recognizing your own picture in what I've been describing. And then the next question is, okay, so what do I actually do? And I want to be honest with you about something right up front. The answer is not a supplement. It's not a protocol you find on the internet. It's not a thyroid support formula from the health food store. Those things may have a role to play at the right time in the right sequence, but leading with them is the wrong move. And I'll tell you exactly why. Okay. Let's go back to the framework we've been building all morning. The thyroid is a victim. Something upstream is creating the stress. Parasitic burden, toxic chemical load, ANS dysregulation, or some combination of all three. If you give someone a thyroid support supplement or even a thyroid medication, while the upstream driver is still running, what have you done? You've added support to a system that is still under active stress. You might get some symptomatic relief. The body might feel slightly better for a period of time, but the thing that's burdening the thyroid is still there, still accumulating, still creating the downstream effects we just spent the last segment walking through. It's like trying to bail out a boat without plugging the hole. You can bail as fast as you want, but the boat is still sinking. The hole has to get addressed first. And that's the principle that governs everything I do in phase 1. All right. Sequence matters more than anything else, okay? And here's something that Harrower understood that modern functional medicine still struggles with. Sequence is everything. The body heals in layers. It doesn't do everything at once. It can't. And when you try to force it, when you load someone up with aggressive detox protocols or high dose supplements or multiple interventions simultaneously, you often make things worse. Not because the interventions are wrong, but because the order is wrong. So think about it this way. If you have a house full of garbage and you want to clean it out, the first thing you need to do is make sure the doors and windows open. Make sure there's a clear path to get the garbage out. If you start moving garbage before the exits are clear, you just make a bigger mess in the middle of the room. The body works the same way. Before you start mobilizing burden, before you address parasitic load or chemical toxicity or anything else that's been accumulating, you have to make sure the drainage pathways are open and functioning. Liver, kidneys, lymphatics, colon. If those pathways are congested and you start clearing burden upstream, you're going to create a traffic jam. Things that should be leaving the body start recirculating, and the person feels worse, not better. That's a detox reaction. And it's not inevitable, it's a sequencing error. Okay, so step 1 always is drainage. Get the exits open. Support the liver, support the kidneys, get the bowel moving efficiently, open the lymphatics. Create the conditions for clearance before you ask the body to clear anything. This is foundational, it's non-negotiable, and it's the piece that most people and most practitioners skip. Then you have the autonomic nervous system. Once drainage is moving, the next priority is the ANS. Remember when we talked about what we talked about in segment 1, the ANS is the master regulator. When it's blocked or dysregulated, the body can't coordinate its own healing response effectively. It doesn't matter how good your supplements are or how clean your diet is. If the nervous system is stuck in a chronic stress pattern, the body's ability to regulate, repair, and respond is fundamentally compromised. If the client this week with toxic chemical load, the ANS was blocked before anything else showed up clearly. That was the first thing that needed to be addressed, not the thyroid, not the downstream symptoms. The regulatory system that governs everything else. When you clear ANS interference, something interesting happens. The body starts to communicate more clearly. Other stress patterns that were hard to read become more distinct. The body's own healing intelligence starts coming back online. And the work that follows, addressing parasitic burden, supporting hormonal regulation, reducing inflammatory load, becomes more effective because the system can actually respond to it. This is the clinical part of what I do, reading what the body needs in what order and respecting that order even when the patient wants to jump straight to the thing that bothers them most. Then the burden. Once drainage is open and the ANS is more regulated, now you can start addressing the upstream drivers directly. For parasitic burden, and I want to be clear, this is not a quick process, the approach is progressive and carefully sequenced. You don't come in swinging with the most aggressive protocol available. You start gently. Watch how the body responds. and build from there. The goal is to reduce burden at a pace the body can handle and clear effectively. This is exactly what the CellCore protocols are designed to do. Para 1 lays the foundation, Para 2 broadens the scope, the binders catch what's being mobilized and escort it out. KL support keeps the kidneys and liver moving efficiently throughout the process. Each piece has a role. Each piece is sequenced deliberately for toxic chemical load, same principle. The goal is to support the body's ability to identify, bind, and eliminate the chemical burden that's been accumulating. In this case, I was using AgriCord for agricultural chemical patterns, Thyroid ChemBinder for broader chemical and environmental toxicity. The specific tools depend on what the body is showing us, which is why we retest at every visit. What the body needs in 1 week is not necessarily what it needs in week 6. The protocol evolves as the body responds. So what happens to the thyroid? Here's the part that I love, the part that makes this work so satisfying. When you address the upstream drivers, when you clear the parasitic burden, reduce the toxic load, restore ANS function, and keep drainage moving efficiently, you don't have to do much to the thyroid directly, because the thyroid wasn't broken. It was burdened. Remove the burden, and the thyroid starts to recover on its own. Energy comes back. Not all at once. This is a process, not a switch, but it comes back. Mental clarity improves. Mood stabilizes. Weight starts to move. Skin changes. Hormonal patterns shift. Digestion improves. The downstream effects begin to resolve because the upstream cause has been addressed. This is what Harrower was pointing at. The body has an inherent capacity to regulate and heal. That's God's design. When you remove what's interfering with that capacity and support the systems that need it, you don't have to force the outcome. You create the conditions for it. I saw this in one of my other cases, one of my longer-term clients who just completed phase 1. She came in fainting, hemoglobin at 8.4, heart palpitations, exhaustion so significant she couldn't drive or care for her grandchildren safely. Parasite index I put on her when she started was 953, pretty high. We focused on drainage, reducing burden, supporting the regulatory systems in the right sequence. By the end of phase 1, her hemoglobin was 13.4. Her parasite index was down to 173. Still work to do, but it was down huge. She's walking 2 miles a day. She's driving again. And she described it herself. The body she has now is not the same body that walked in. That's not the thyroid supplement doing that. That's the body healing when the burden is removed and the sequence is respected. So what does this look like in practice? What does it actually look like if you're someone sitting at home thinking, okay, I recognize myself in this conversation, what do I do? Well, step 1 is assessment. It's not a lab panel, a real assessment, one that looks at how your body is actually functioning, what systems are under stress, what's creating that stress, and what needs to happen first. That's what day 1 is. That's where everything starts. You come in, we spend real time together. I run the Q&T assessment, and by the end of that appointment, I have a clear picture of what your body is showing us. Not a guess, not a protocol I hand to everyone, a specific map of your physiology right now. We talk about your whole health history, everything that led up to that point. I look at all of it. Okay. Then day 2 is your report of findings. That's where I sit across from you and walk you through exactly what I found, what's driving it, and what the plan looks like. In the same kind of detail we've been talking about this morning. You leave that appointment understanding your body in a way you probably haven't before. And then phase 1 begins. 12 weeks, structured, sequential, guided every step of the way. Supplements tested and adjusted at every visit. Food and lifestyle is woven in there. Progress is tracked. The protocol evolving as your body responds, because it will respond, and what it needs changes as it does. This is not a one-size-fits-all program. It never has been. Every protocol I build is specific to what that person's body is showing on that day. And that's the whole point. So who is this for? Okay. I want to be direct about something because I think it's important. This process works. I've seen it work consistently over years of clinical practice, but it requires something from you. It requires that you show up consistently, that you communicate what you're experiencing, that you follow the protocol as designed, and that you trust the sequence even when you want to skip ahead. I'm selective about who I work with, not because I'm trying to be exclusive, but because this is a partnership. And partnerships only work when both people are committed. The people I work with are the ones who are done managing symptoms. They are done being told they're fine when they know they're not. They're done taking medications that address the signal while the source keeps running. They're ready to do the actual work. They're ready to commit to a real process with real structure behind it. If that's you, if this morning's conversation has been the thing you've been looking for, then I want to hear from you. The information is at the end of the show. Reach out. Look to the top of my bio up in my profile. There's a link to my website. I have specials running. The information, let's have the conversation about the information. Let's find out if this is the right fit, because your thyroid is not your problem. And your problem, whatever it is, has a source. And sources can be found, and found things can be addressed. That's the work, and I'd love to help you do it. Okay. I made a post yesterday. I opened up 5 positions for next week for new clients. Okay. At $150. When you go to the website, there's a coupon bubble that pops right up. Get the code out of that, and you can sign up. 5 seats next week, and next week is a short week. Remember, it's Memorial Day. Okay. So I want to leave you this morning with the same place we started. Your labs came back normal. Your doctor said you're fine, and you still feel terrible. That's not you being dramatic. That's not anxiety or hypochondria or getting older. That's a body trying to tell you something that the standard tools aren't designed to hear. Harrower heard it in 1939. He mapped it. He documented it. And 87 years later, the people who are getting real results are the ones who go back to that foundational understanding. The body is a system. The thyroid is part of that system. And when it's struggling, you look upstream. That's what we do here every single week with every single client. If you're ready to find out what your body is actually trying to tell you, reach out. Day 1 assessment. That's where it starts, a Q&T full assessment. Thank you for spending your morning with me on this. I apologize for running late. I'll see you next week. But before we close, Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the information that you helped me pull together in preparation for this show this week. Thank you for the clients that came through, perhaps at your nudging, telling them the time was right. Help others that are struggling with this choice, with this decision. I don't do the healing, Father. I know you do the healing, and I'm just here to facilitate as you direct me to do. So bring folks in when they're ready, and let's get started on the work that they need to do, that you know they need to do. In your name we pray, through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. I appreciate every one of you. Thank you for listening. And I see an old buddy of mine from when I was stationed in Germany, Chuck Boyd. He was in the Army. I was in the Navy, and we were stationed there together. I was stationed actually on an Army post in Germany. This was back in the 80s. And so, good morning to you, Chuck. I appreciate you tuning on, brother. Glad to see you. So, folks, again, if anything you heard today resonates, if you know somebody's struggling with the things we talked about today, please send them a link to this video or send them the link to my website. Tell them about it. The best advertising I have is word of mouth. Okay. And I appreciate everybody who sends somebody or refers somebody in. And that's how we're going to help more people, is just if this sounds like you, please contact me. If you've been with me and received help, tell people. Okay. I look forward to talking to you all next week. Today was episode 97. We're getting closer to the 100. I don't know what I'm going to do for show 100 yet, but we'll get there. All right. Love you all. God bless. Thank you, Christine. Amen.